Who stepped away for a moment to refresh before the second panel. My name is Tammy Patrick, and I'm a senior advisor at the elections team at Democracy Fund and an adjunct professor here at the University of Minnesota. And when we started planning this conference, and I saw that there was going to be a session about Maricopa County, I said, oh, please, 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 can I be the one that gets to moderate that panel? Because I'm always so excited to hear what's happening in my former jurisdiction and where my heart still lives. So I'm thrilled today to get started on this conversation because I know it's going to fly by. One quick housekeeping note is that the chat function is not working properly, so there will be a link to a Google Doc that will be put in the chat in a moment here. You can click on that link to the Google Doc. It is safe and secure, so if you've been going through your TTXs and various cybersecurity trainings, we promise it's okay. Click on that and then you can put your questions there. You can also, I would imagine, be able to put it in Twitter. We have been using the tentative hashtag of election accuracy. So that's another mechanism I know some of us here in the room have been following along on Twitter. So with that said, I want to jump in and get started because I have three individuals that I'm thrilled to talk to today. First of all, we will be hearing from Stephen Richer, who is the Maricopa County Recorder elected in 2020. What an infamous time to be elected there, sir. So welcome. And then we also will be hearing from Megan Gilbertson, the Director of Communications for Maricopa County. And we, of course, coordinated what we're going to wear today. Not really, but I'm glad that you got the memo as well, Jen, because we are all very Arizona in our color landscape up here. And then also Jen Fifield, who is the Arizona reporter for VoteBeat, formerly with the Arizona Republic. What I really wanted to do today is many of us followed the headlines, we read the stories, but I wanted to hear from the three of you what your perspective is about what happened, what worked well, what maybe didn't work so well, so we can learn some lessons there. So we're going to start off with you, Recorder Richer. I would love to hear your kind of timeline of what's happened since the election. Did you think this was the job you were running for? And if so, will you ever run for it again? Are you going to seek a second term after your first one has been so memorable? But I'd like to hear from you just a little bit of your perspective around what has been happening and how you have led the charge in 2021, probably doing a job that you didn't know was going to be the job you were running for.
Yeah, no, I certainly couldn't have predicted this. I certainly couldn't have predicted that of all the counties in all the states in all the world, the election integrity conversation would center on Maricopa County. But I think we in Georgia really have been the focuses over the past year, and that's largely because of the continued review of the 2020 election by multiple groups. I think most infamously a group called the Cyber Ninjas. And so it's been a pretty bleak portrayal into humanity's soul. What distinguishes us as creatures is our ability to reason. And I have fundamentally questioned that ability after the past year and a half. I think this has been a war not just on election administration, but a war on truth. I think that this has been a war on the epistemological process. We are no longer living in a world in which you can make a logical argument and you can show people the facts, and that's that. But we're living in a world in which, he who shouts loudest, he who shouts most frequently, he who is undeterred by any evidence to the contrary can keep pushing forward. And increasingly, people aren't even talking to each other. They're operating in different media ecosystems. So, yeah, I've given a lot of thought. And because I'm a competitive person, I think I too often fall into the pitfall of wanting to score points. And so when we think about what's worked well over the last few years and what should be done differently, I've broken people into three camps, and I have the professionals, the politicians, and the people. So the people are the people that Megan is communicating to on a regular basis, and that's the 4.6 million people in Maricopa County, the 2.6 million registered voters. And those are the people who aren't living a political life, but are, consuming a little bit of news here and there and are participating in the midterm and general elections and maybe some of the jurisdictional elections, although we'd love for them to participate at a higher rate. So for them, I think you have to get, and this is very tempting, to get away from the point scoring game, get away from the you're dumb, what your assumptions are wrong, you're spreading disinformation, and get towards back into the business of befriending and building trust. And I think the 2020 election misinformation has its roots in the fact that we no longer have a definitive source of truth. I think rightfully or wrongfully, a lot of people lost confidence, lost trust, lost friendship, lost partnership with the mainstream media. And so they started looking to alternative outlets, and those alternative outlets weren't beholden to the same sorts of journalistic standards, the same types of editorial process. And so, that has really opened the field for a deluge of misinformation. And so rather than telling those people why they're wrong, I think we have to build relationships with those people. We have to bring them into their office to show that we're not three-headed monsters who are running this in a manipulative manner, but we're humans, we're their fellow Arizonans, we're their neighbors who are doing this. And so hopefully when they say, maybe I should think twice about that, because I met that Megan Gilbertson lady and she seemed like a nice, moral, reasonable individual. And so maybe I should take what she said seriously and give it some thought. So the second group is politicians. This is where I'm especially disappointed, because these are the people who have the information. These are the people who know better. These are the people who, have even sort of gone quietly into a dark hole of disinformation, even with their knowledge. And I think this is represented by the audio that was released yesterday regarding a conversation between Minority Leader McCarthy in the U.S. House and Liz Cheney. And McCarthy pretty much said that he knows the election stuff from 2020 is nonsense. He advocated for Trump to resign in the post-January 6th election context. But obviously, that's no longer the position that he has taken. So what's changed? And it's really the incentive structure. The incentive structure has been stacked to favor those Republican politicians who will continue promoting the big lie, whether because of the primary systems that are set up or because of fundraising purposes or because it's an avenue to gaining the endorsement of the former president. And so I think we have to look as a political community, how do we change that incentive structure such that people like McCarthy, who know better, who admitted as much, and there are, I would say, about 75% of elected Republicans fall into that camp, but are willing to go along with the big lie because it's currently politically advantageous. And the last community is professionals. And I'm a lawyer, so I think most frequently of the Bar Association, but I do not think that professional communities have done enough to discipline their members into appropriate behavior in the election context. So whereas I said normal people shouldn't be made fun of, they shouldn't be ostracized, they shouldn't be chastised for maybe having some misconceptions about how elections are administered, I don't believe that is the case with professionals. And I don't think groups have taken enough steps to discipline their members. So here in Arizona, we had one of the Kraken iterations that was filed, and yet no action has been taken by the State Bar Association to discipline attorneys who knowingly presented something that was false, who did zero fact check into it, and who really damaged our institutions by putting forward those claims. I think, again, also in industries like journalism, I think that there should be more of you should become a pariah within the journalistic industry if you don't look into checking some of these things, if you don't do the legwork. So I think that's, an area where we could do better, because then if these professionals are not advancing these claims, then hopefully it doesn't trickle down to average people. So hopefully that's a little bit of a landscape. No, it's by no means what I expected, but it's been a worthwhile ride. I truly believe that this is the fight of our decade, and I truly believe that elections, like I said, are just a proxy war for a greater war on truth.
Well, thank you. And I don't think it's something that any of us expected. If someone had told me a few years ago that we would be repeatedly discussing cyber ninjas and bamboo ballot paper, I would have thought they were absolutely crazy. And I do think that you're right. Accountability is going to be critical, and getting people to say into the mic what they are more than willing to discuss off the mic is going to be a big challenge. And I know you said that you're a competitive person, but you also aren't allocating points. But I will say that my panel now has 1 point for epistemological process references. So just so that you all know, if you're playing along at home in the speaker panel bingo, that's, I think, the center square. So with that, I want to turn to Megan. So Megan, I have been so thrilled to see the way in which the office and your staff and yourself and everyone there have embraced this moment to really try and get ahead of the game with what is the truth, what are the facts. And so I would love to hear from you kind of like how this has played out. So what has been your strategy around the social media, the specific website, because it wasn't just combating one narrative. There were so many things you were combating. And so you had to designate a whole source portion of the website to this. So walk us through from a communication professional's perspective, because we have, a few hundred people on the line today and who'll be watching this over time when it gets posted. And for many offices, they are the comms person. So as Jed mentioned earlier, it's a skill set. So I would love to hear from you, what happened? How did you maintain your sanity? And what are some of the things that the smaller offices that don't have the ability, and some would say the luxury, but I don't think it's a luxury in this day and age anymore to have designated communication professionals. It's a necessity. So welcome, and I can't wait to hear what you have to say.
Well, thank you, Tammy. I really appreciate you having me and inviting me here. I love the University of Minnesota. Minnesota is my home state. So even though I live in Arizona and I probably will live there for the rest of my life, I still love it here. So let me first dive into the incredible speed at which misinformation spreads. My first dive into it was Sharpiegate. And so let me just give you a little background. For decades in Maricopa County, we encouraged voters to steer clear of ink that would bleed through the ballot because it could cause overvotes on the opposite side of the ballot. So in 2019, Maricopa County redesigned our ballots to have offset columns so that bleed through wouldn't be an issue anymore. And we tested a variety of ink to make sure it wouldn't gum up our new optical scan precinct-based tabulators. And we landed with the manufacturer recommended Sharpie. And we used the new pen without much fanfare for the presidential preference election, 2 jurisdictional elections, and the August primary election in 2020. We even included information about the new ballot in our marketing and comms strategy from January to March in 2020. But then one kind of big thing happened in March, COVID-19. So we had to pivot pretty quickly our public messaging for the primary election. And instead of talking about the new ballot, we focused on informing voters about the new safety measures in place, about our brand new Vote Anywhere, Vote Center model, and provide them information about all of their voting options, including our robust early voting options. We saw some chatter about concerns with security and oversight after the primary election, so we added messaging going into the 2020 general election to address these areas, including creating informational videos and infographics on early ballot security, Dropbox security, tabulation security, and we even created a video about the type of ink that voters could use and how bleed through wouldn't impact tabulation. During the general election, reporters called actually during early voting to say that people were telling them that Sharpies and bleed through would invalidate their vote. We did media interviews on the topic. We shared our informational video, and we were even able to assuage the Arizona Attorney General, who sent an official request asking us for asking for us to provide evidence that Sharpies didn't invalidate votes. But after Election Day, voters clung on to the fear that their vote wasn't counted because of Sharpies. And that fear was spread by influential social media accounts, even though the truth was widely reported. While it was easily debunked, this piece of misinformation was then used in lawsuits, and it's really what began the uproar in Arizona. So let's fast forward to the Cyber Ninjas and 2021. The difference between Sharpiegate and the Cyber Ninjas is authority. Sharpiegate was spread online and debunked by top elected officials of both parties in Arizona, but the mis, dis, and malinformation that was spread by the Cyber Ninjas was authorized and endorsed by the state Senate. So media interviews and a video, it just wasn't going to be enough to dispel the true malinformation being spread by the Cyber Ninjas. So we needed to create a platform where we could use to send to the media and share with the public so they could get accurate information. We decided to create a web page that would be dedicated to this, and we would tie it into our newsletter and onto social media. And this is how we began justthefacts.vote. It was an incredibly effective tool to have everything in one place and serve really as a guidepost for accuracy. So what can you do as election officials? How can you combat misinformation? Honestly, I may not be the best person to tell you, but what I do know is you have to tell your story and tell it in a way that people can understand. We all need to do a better job about pulling down the curtains and providing more than just election dates and deadlines. We shouldn't just be sharing the nuts and bolts about elections. It's also about the human aspect. And I think that's something the last panel talked about quite effectively. In the elections department, we're not faceless bureaucrats. We live in our community and we hire thousands of poll workers that live in our community too. This year, our communication strategy is going to continue to focus on the facts in our justthefacts.vote, but we're also going to highlight the people and the people that work in the elections department and that support the elections in Maricopa County. And I just want to read one of the messages that are for our 2022 communications plan. An entire community of your friends and neighbors are working to ensure a secure, transparent, and accurate election in Maricopa County. Discover what it takes by visiting beballotready.vote. I'm committed to doing that, and I know others are too. And so I'm really hopeful and excited to be part of this conversation. So thank you so much, Tammy.
Absolutely. Great. Well, we've got a lot of questions that we're going to dive into, but first, Jen, I want to bring you in, and I would be remiss because pens have already come up. Right. So we've got Sharpies, but we also, you were, I think, ascribed the nickname of Blue Pen Jen. And thank God you were in the Coliseum that day to see that people were using blue pens around ballots. And I know for every election official that heard that, it like made the hair on my neck stand up and my stomach kind of flip over, because anyone who knows elections knows that it's red and green pens, my friends, around marked official ballots. So talk us through what it was like from the local reporting side of things, and just what that process really felt like as a local reporter there in the Coliseum and in both those early days, and then also, since then, and how other reporters and other individuals who are perhaps listening in the audience, some of the things that they should be considering when they're approaching that sort of a situation.
Well, first, thank you so much, Tammy, for having me. I was excited when I heard that you guys were doing this because it's so important. It's such an important topic, especially since you said, many election offices have, one person to do everything. Communications has to be top of mind somehow. I don't know how you all do it, but that's for another day. And before I get going, I just wanted to say that I think one of the reasons I knew about the pens was because of Megan, because of Sharpiegate, because when that happened, I tried to learn as much as I could about ink on ballots, which is kind of like ironic that then that was what on the first day of the audit I noticed. So it was that like prior knowledge that I had going into an election process that helped me understand how it should work, which I think is just absolutely key for local reporters. So as you said, I'm working at VoteBeat now. I'm very excited to join their team. They're expanding across the country in many different states. So you're going to see a lot of VoteBeat local reporters reaching out to you soon. And I just encourage you to welcome them with open arms, because we're really here to tell the truth, to learn what your job is as election administrators, and to figure out how to tell the story year round of elections, of all the work that goes into it, but also the truths, the struggles. And not everything in elections is perfect, so we'll be telling those stories too. But really get to having dedicated reporters on this full-time elections and voting. And so that's very exciting for me. So before the audit, I don't know if you heard Doug Logan, CEO of Cyber Ninjas, was very clear he only wanted friendly reporters to be there to witness this. That was something in his emails that we saw later. We didn't know that at the time, so we're just going about trying to get as much access as we can into the process so we can be there as witnesses, tell people how the ballots are being counted, see if this is a legitimate process. And that was our main, that's always, journalists' main goal, is to find the truth and to spread that. So we didn't really know how much difficulty we would have getting in. We were at first told you can't go in at all, and then you have to volunteer, which is how I got my shift on the first day. I was the only reporter to get that shift, which was terrifying for me, to be honest, because you are then the kind of the spokesperson for everyone who couldn't get in, including, county administrators weren't in there. So I was calling Megan on my breaks on that first day and trying to ask her, like, how do things go? I learned so much about the fact that you have to be initially prepared and understand how elections work when you get somewhere. Because if you don't really know what to look for. So I guess that is what I wanted to emphasize today, is that if you partner with local reporters and give them a tour of your office, show them where you count ballots, invite them to poll worker training, put out fact sheets ahead of your election on how things are going to work, develop one-pagers that explain certain processes, like this is how we verify signatures, this is how we count early ballots, this is when that process finishes. All the simple things that you do that you think are so normal that no one else really knows or understands. Ahead of time, if reporters know that going in, they're going to be so much better at getting the facts right on election day or in the days leading up to it. So I just wanted to emphasize that it's really a partnership. It was funny when this all started, the county had been so used to the Republic kind of picking apart elections for years. Everything that went wrong on election day, we were there to tell that story. And, I remember in the 2018 election, even, it was all about, well, these polling places didn't open on time and reporters are trying to learn about, who's the contractor and all scramble around to figure out why they weren't opening on time. A very important story for our community. But then when this happened, it was kind of like I had someone at the county, not inside the county, but a politician say, we're so used to you guys being kind of, on the other side of things. And now it seems like you're really trying to find out the truth about elections. And that was comforting for me to hear, that it seemed like, well, I'm not going to be on the county side. I really it was relieving to hear that someone trusted that I wasn't going to try to tear them apart. I was just going to try to learn the truth of what happened. So thank you so much for inviting me.
Oh, absolutely. So this is going to be participatory. So everyone who's an election official that has received a phone call from a reporter on election day saying, where are all the lines? That's where I want to go. Please raise your hand. Okay. Yep. Pretty much every election official. So I think, that is the story, right? You want to have a line of voters behind you when you're pitching the story. And I do think that, the prior knowledge of how elections work is really, really critical. One of the things I've been saying for quite a while, it's become one of my mantras, is that you need to know what's right so you can tell what's wrong. So you knew it was right to have red and green pens, so you knew it was wrong to have blue pens. You know, when there's a viral video circulating of votes being flipped in whatever the state is, if you know that that's not even the equipment they use in that state, it's pretty easy and quick to debunk certain things. So one of the things I wanted to kind of dig in here is that we've heard about the influential messengers and how that can be both positive and negative, right? Having your local official or a state official be a local messenger. But when you have these influential messengers that are in fact incentivized by the structure of closed primaries, or let's just say it for what it is, the coffers were lined in Arizona around not paying for what was happening, because we know that that cost the taxpayers, but many politicians, both those that came to Arizona to get their pictures taken with the cyber ninjas and leveraged that back home on the campaign trail, there's a financial incentive there as well. And recently I was talking to a former state election official in Arizona, and so I have to attribute this to him, but I don't know if he really would want me to say his name. But what he was talking about is that all of this mis and disinformation is an energy that we need a lightning rod that connects it and grounds it and dissipates it when it's wrong and harmful and hurtful. And I keep coming back to that lightning rod. And so that's what Rusty Bowers did, with the bill. That is not what happened when that Cyber Ninja report was done and was handed back to the Senate. They didn't say, this is done, close the deal. No, they passed it on to the Attorney General's office. So we need people to be the lightning rods for mis and disinformation and to ground it in reality and dissipate it. So here's the question that I often get from reporters and election officials, and it's, when you see that information that's out there, when do we engage and when do we leave it alone? Because when is engaging adding oxygen to the conversation and spreading it, or providing it a legitimacy of answering it? So I would like to talk about that for just a minute. Or, should we always try to correct falsehoods with the truth, no matter when, where, or who's speaking it? So I'm going to start off with you, Recorder Richard, and get your perspective on that, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I don't know. I have a ill-defined, delicate balancing test that, when it starts getting so large, or depending on the speaker, it's maybe something that I should map out. Truthfully, it has more to do with how much sleep I've gotten the night before and my level of discipline. Yeah, I mean, but like I said, I think it depends on the speaker in particular, because certain speakers carry more weight. And if it comes from somebody with the trappings of authority, as Megan suggested, it can fly further than if it's just kitty cat 127 on Twitter or something like that. So that's probably where I direct my efforts. But I mean, this can be psychologically damaging to people in our office and people in this community. And so you have to draw some boxes around it. Otherwise, you're doing this 24/7. And, then there's the well never runs out, and you feel like the entire world is against you, when really you're just looking at a certain segment of the population, some of whom aren't even real human beings, because we know that there have been efforts by foreign actors to sow the seeds of discontent in American democracy by nation states. And so, I really, don't want Megan to be like, I haven't slept for 3 months, but those Russian bots, they know not to mess with me now, sort of thing. So, I focus when it's, especially local politicians that I know of.
Great. And Megan, I feel like you should have an opportunity to jump in on that.
Well,
So when the recorder is tired and not disciplined. How does that affect your job?
Well, I have to say it's a delicate balance because, we as election officials aren't just here to answer every piece of misinformation or every question that there is about elections. We actually have to run elections as well. And so it's a balance between trying to share the information that the public needs to know and still being able to do our jobs on a daily basis. And so for us, we take each piece and each claim to determine whether or not we feel like this is kind of a systemic thing, something that we really will be able to kind of tamp down, or is it just a wild, outlandish claim that we can just say, we don't know where those types of numbers are ridiculous. They're, what algorithm are they kind of talking about? We've proven time and time again that, the system in Maricopa County is free, fair, and accurate. The best pivot for me is pushing people back to the report that we did and the website. So that's a great place for people to continue to get that information. And so I don't think that there's a true line that says when it's like this or when this person says that. It's more about what can your office manage? How can you figure out how to balance responding to these types of things with your daily jobs? And I think that is something, a give and take and a push and pull, or how much you sleep or don't sleep the night before, that you really have to try and figure out for yourself in your office.
I think part of the challenge also is I've had people in the past saying, well, don't take it so personally. And like, oh, I am going to take everything personally because this is not just a job. For the vast majority of election professionals, it is their life's passion. And so it's always personal. Jen, I'd like to get your perspective on this. Some reporters that I've spoken to in the past have told me, I will always give it oxygen because particularly with inflammatory and incendiary headlines, because I get paid on clicks. And if I don't get X number of clicks on the online platform, my editor is all over me. And so I would love to get your perspective on that kind of notion from a reporter's vantage point of how the system, depending on where you're reporting, and how what the incentive structure is there sometimes for reporters, and whether or not you think that that's a healthy way of compensating journalists or not, or I'll let you just leave any of those things lie that you don't want to address and pick up the things that you're more interested in.
Thank you. So that is completely not how it worked at the Republic, and that's not going to be how it works at VoteBeat. At the Republic, we took so much, we spent so much time discussing what to cover and what not to cover for this very reason. Because if you do give it oxygen, that's it just spreads the lies further. And so there was a lot of debate, and that's what it takes. It takes thinking through, what Recorder Richard was saying about where is it coming from, how much traction does it have, and are we going to be able to effectively tell the story without spreading that lie? So there's this theory in journalism where if you make a mistake in a story, when you correct it, you don't repeat the mistake. You just say what's true. And so I guess the same theory applies here. If someone is, what is that, kitty cat is spreading a lie about ballots burning in a chicken fire, you think I'm making this up, but most of you probably know that that was actually one of the rumors. So is it just kitty cat saying this? And if it's not, if it's on a very, very, very well-read far-right website, how can we address this without repeating the chicken fire at all? We don't have to say the chicken fire didn't happen. We just have to say, this is how many early ballots the county got and counted, and they were tracked the whole time. So, it's about taking the lies and finding the truth in them, and then emphasizing that instead of focusing on the lie.
I like that. Leading with the truth is always important. And I'm going to direct the question back to you, Jen, and then we'll weigh in with everyone else. What do we do when the truth doesn't matter anymore? So, the reports come out, things are debunked, and yet they still get traction. And there's, of course, the Mark Twain quote that I always butcher about, the lie is going to make its way around the world a couple times before even the truth gets its shoes on. So what do we do in this situation when the truth isn't sufficient or isn't convincing? I think this ties into the first panel's conversation around the emotional aspect of it. I think that I've kind of built my career on having sound data and that the facts do matter and we need to have the facts, but how do we make that balance and tell the story well enough that we can ground it in facts and truth and still have that emotional kind of aspect to it?
Yeah, I think I'll let the other two speak a lot more on this because I don't know the answer. And it's something that I've thought about for, more than a year now. But I think that my approach has always been to inform the reasonable audience. And once I do that, feel comfortable with the fact that the reasonable people, the people that are going to be persuaded by facts, have all the information they need to tell the story to the people that don't. And so that's my job, is getting the truth out there and in the most effective way. Catering to people's emotions by using anecdotes or personal examples is always in journalism, something that reporters try to do in order to make stories resonate, but that really can go so far. So.
Great. Do the other two have you figured this out for us? Recorded.
No, I haven't figured it out by any stretch of the imagination with respect to the average consumer of media or the average retweeter. I'll just go back to the other two P's that I mentioned, the professionals and the politicians. With respect to the politicians, we have a state senator, Wendy Rogers, who's one of the largest progenitors of falsehoods in the country regarding the 2020 election. She came into our elections facility. She did a tour. She was very polite. She was very receptive. She got along well with all of our staff. And I would have liked to have said that we had a good relationship built in that 2-hour period. And she didn't challenge any of our processes. She even seemed to agree with them. 30 minutes later, her Twitter feeds, running off about, another, falsehood suggesting that, I don't know, the 2020 election should be decertified. I began this by saying I've been alarmed at how irrational mankind is, but in some ways, Wendy Rogers is the ultimate rational actor because she set fundraising records for the state legislatures throughout the entire history of Arizona in 2021. And so, I guess in that instance, I would say you should signal to that person, hopefully, general Arizonans, that is an unacceptable means for trying to gain re-election. I won't vote for you, and I certainly won't donate to you. Now, I'm shouting into the wind right there because obviously Wendy's a more successful fundraiser than really just about anyone in the state, including yours truly. So yeah, I don't know. And then as far as professionals, Mark Brnovich, who's our attorney general, just put out this letter that is, complete errant nonsense. And the thing is he's not just a politician, he's also an attorney. And I think the legal community needs to step up and say, if we are to have any sort of, self-regulatory function, then that's simply something that you can't do. And that's embarrassing to the community. There's been a certain amount of that, but I would like to see more.
Great. Did you want to jump in, Megan?
I would say I would jump in on maybe the third P that the recorder Richard spoke about, the public, right? The general public. We're talking about the people that come and participate in the election once every 2 years. And how do we continue to communicate with them so they can be they can understand the election, they can participate in the election, and they can believe in the election. And so, I think it goes back to creating those connections, inviting the public into our spaces. One of the things that we're doing this year is partnering more with our community organizations that have deep roots in the community, bringing them in, letting them understand more about the election so they can help, kind of share our message back out with members of their community. In the last panel, they talked a lot about how to engage Latino voters. And there's such a huge and integral part of Maricopa County and the voters that we serve. And everything that we do is in English and Spanish. It must be because they are such a big part of that. And so I think it's trying to find ways to involve your community in elections outside of the election cycle. How do they, what do they want to know? What does their community want to know? Maybe there's panels that you can speak on. Maybe there's groups that you can invite in to teach them about that. And those are the types of things that we're trying to figure out, and maybe others across the country are as well.
So you just answered question number 2 that was just handed to me, but I'm going to read it out loud because I want everyone who's watching and listening to hear what the question to pose, and think about how in your own office you're doing these things. And this came from Michelle with the League of Women Voters. Do you partner with groups like the League of Women Voters? We're a nonpartisan 501c group and can help you to educate and outreach to voters. We'd like to help our community of democracy nonprofits better surround and support our county election offices. So that's something to think about. And I think your answer kind of answered that one for us. We have a couple of more questions coming in. So from Pamela, who's the BPC elections campaign manager, she has a question for you, Megan. How do you define success in your comm strategy with so much beyond your control? So for example, the leader of the Republican Party continuing to spread mis and disinformation around the Maricopa County election and elections department.
That's a really great question. And I'm not sure it's one that I can answer fully. So let me answer it this way instead, which is such a communications thing to do. I think that the answer is participation in the election, is having voters come in and having your poll workers understand what's happening. I think that defines success. I think small actions of ensuring that the media knows that they can give you a call, that they can ask before printing. I think in this age of social media where you see a long line and you're like, oh, there must be something wrong there. Well, maybe first give us a call and then we'll let you know that there's a long line, but we have, this many people that are working on whatever that issue is. And so I think that it can be challenging to, have that like constant barrage of misinformation coming at us. But I truly believe that the work that we're doing as election officials is important and needs to be shared, and finding those partners to help us share it is critical to the success.
Great, thank you. This one is for Recorder Richer, and it's from Matthew. It says, what tools do you utilize to efficiently find and recognize disinformation on social media? Because I see you on social media quite a bit. I'm not gonna lie, I follow you. And it's always great. And so I'm curious, when you come across something, are you doom scrolling just like the rest of us are doom scrolling? Or are you doom scrolling with a purpose to identify certain things that you can hand off to Megan or to others? How do you do that effectively on a day-to-day basis without going?
No, I'm sure we utilize tools. Megan could speak to those tools, but I'm just a psycho without much of a life, without too many hobbies. And so I pay attention to a lot of this stuff, and I do it while watching basketball, watching the NBA playoffs at night too. And so, my tweets will be interspersed with commentary on how it's alarming that Devin Booker is out for the next 2 games. But meanwhile, that's inaccurate information about the 2020 election. So no, I don't. Yes, there are a myriad of tools. I should probably be better about utilizing them in my personal capacity. But the office does utilize all the sort of analytics, the Hootsuites of the world. But I'm by no means a specialist.
I would disagree, Recorder. And this is why, is that I think that people can you might not be able to recognize that you're seeing disinformation or misinformation, but the way that you can counteract that is to follow the trusted sources. And you are a trusted source. And so when, the community should be following the county officials, the Secretary of State's office, whoever is the organizations that do truly know how elections work and how they operate. And that's how you can combat it. You combat it through the right voices who know what's happening on the ground.
And Jen, how about you? What do you decide needs to be fact checked and what is just in fact kitty cat 734?
I guess if it is a troll and I know they're a troll, I don't engage. That's like my rule. I don't, sometimes they get me and I, in a moment of weakness, will respond and just give the facts again. But I think it is hardest when it becomes personal online and on Twitter, and it did over the course of the year, the last year for me, many times. And so just learning to step away and say that this person isn't trying to engage in a meaningful conversation. And if you don't engage, then they're going to get less attention, was kind of my rule. I know some reporters do take a different approach, and I don't know what's correct, but it helped me maintain my sanity. That's all that mattered to me.
Yep, we all have to find those things. And we're going to wrap up. I've got a lightning round, one last question and this comes from Kim, on whether or not you have any advice on how local election officials can best deal with the onslaught of public records requests. So oftentimes they're totally legitimate from reporters. A FOIA is a great transparency channel, but we do know that there's a concerted effort. It's practically denial of service attacks at this point on offices with FOIA requests. So we'll just do a quick lightning round. If you have any suggestions, we'll start with you, Jen. You deal with a lot of FOIA requests. Sometimes it takes a very long time to get information, but now in light of what's happening, do you have any suggestions?
Yeah, I'm really glad this got brought up. So basically, if you're an administrator and you have zero time for this, which I understand, call the reporter and ask them exactly what they're looking for right away. Say, you put in this really super broad request and it's going to take a few years, legitimately a few years to get it. What do you need? What are you looking for? Reporters get defensive if you ask them, what's the story? Because oftentimes reporters don't really know what the story is until they get the records. But just be friendly, be nice. I want to be helpful. And the reporter is going to really appreciate that, that you know that they're a human just looking for information.
Great. Recorder Richard?
It's been a challenge for our office, but I'm proud of where we're at. We respond to the average public records request within a week, but we've been swamped. We've gone from an office that maybe in 2015 got 86 public records requests a year to we got 86 public records requests in March of this year. So we in 2021 had hundreds. Many of them were produce everything related to elections for the past 2 years. And I was like, okay, well, yeah. So first step, reach out to the person who made the request. Just as Jen said, oftentimes they just don't know exactly what they're looking for, but by talking it through, and especially with responsible requesters like Jen, you can sort of get a sense of what would be the key terms to search. Second, if it's somebody who's there for antagonistic purposes and just to harass you, speak with whoever your attorney representation is as the elections department and say, most case law and statutes have some sort of can't be unduly burdensome type narrowing focus. So you can't be produce everything and every single thing ever for the eternity, for all eternity sort of thing. So we can narrow that. And if it's overly broad, then you can, maybe you don't have to statutorily respond to it. And then the third thing is be organized, because so much of this stuff is asked for multiple times, such that you don't want to be recreating the wheel every single time. So have all the records requests that you've responded to before listed, outlined, such that if one comes in and it's 9/10 the same, well, you don't have to redo that work at least. And then, we're lucky that we have a rock star who's a designated person to corral people. And then leadership, I guess the last part would leadership has to let people know that it is a priority, because it's easy to put on the back burner as this is the last thing I want to have to deal with, is going through my emails from the past 3 months when we have things going on. But no, I need you to work on that. And we need to respond as responsible stewards of public records.
Great, thank you.
I feel like that's a little bit unfair that Recorder Richard got to go before me, since the Recorder's Office is who manages our public records requests. But one thing I will say is, the system is so incredibly important, is to have the process and the system in place to be able to intake those. Like the recorder said, to be able to have a place where you can always go back. If everyone's requesting kind of very similar things, you can always go back and pull the information that you've provided previously. Work with your county attorney, with whoever your, person is, to make sure that those overly broad requests could be narrowed down, and that you can do that. And then I totally agree with Jen on reporters. Sometimes they are asking for it because they want to kind of see what's in there, or what could potentially be there. And so sometimes they're on deadline and they don't really need everything that they asked for. And by being honest with them that request is going to take us a week, it's going to take us a month, it's going to take us 2 months, that will help them better decide, well, okay, go forward with that. And then you prioritize, or they can kind of tailor it to something else, or I can provide them one document and that's exactly what they were looking for. So it's those 3 steps.
Great. Well, thank you for the 3 of you for joining us today for this conversation. I knew it would fly by, and it's great to see you all.